Secure your Elixir apps with Paraxial.io. From code analysis and bot defense to dependency checks, they've got you covered. Elixir first design with GitHub integration. Elevate your security at Paraxial.io. Testing. All right. What's up? I'm Jacob Litzo, your Elixir mentor, and welcome to another exciting episode of the Elixir Mentor podcast. This is where we discuss everything related to Elixir, from interviews with enthusiasts, pioneers in the community, to innovative projects and libraries shaping Elixir's future. Today, I'm joined by Isaac, and he already tried to coach me with his last name. I don't want to butcher it, so I'm going to let him introduce his full name. But he's a software engineer and author of Northwind Elixir Traders, and I'm excited to have him here. We might be having some technical difficulties because I don't...
You should be able to hear me, but...
I do hear you, but I can't see you.
Yep. I'll use the built-in camera. It's worse, but it works.
Okay. We always have, there we are. We always have technical difficulties right when we're supposed to go live.
There we go. There we go.
Hey. Well, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to have you here.
Thank you.
Can you go ahead and just give like a quick introduction to yourself, who you are, what your background is, and yeah, we'll kick it off from there.
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks Jacob for the opportunity. My name is Isaac Tsalicoglou. You don't need to remember the last name, it's difficult to pronounce. I'm a mechanical engineer by training. I've worked for many years abroad. So I live in Greece now for the past 5 years. I lived in Central Europe, traveled the world in a corporate career, did various things like R&D of turbochargers, product development, machine learning actually in R&D. That's how I really programmed a lot in Python, not Elixir back then. Elixir didn't exist yet. And I wrote a book that has been a surprising success, and that came after 2 years of getting immersed in the Elixir ecosystem.
I love that.
So there we are.
Yeah, I started reading your book. I haven't gotten as far through it as I was hoping, but I think it's a great resource for just like getting started, understanding how databases work, like how Ecto works, and kind of just how to efficiently build your schemas and work with data in Elixir apps. Yeah. I'm curious what made you want to go with the Northwind application.
So I don't even remember why I went with Northwind. I know that I remember that there's a Northwind Traders database at some point, which I had in an old Microsoft Access 97 CD way back when. And so what happened is I got into Elixir, then Phoenix LiveView, and as I was following tutorials and documentation, I realized that I'm having troubles building things the way I imagined them. Like I would create the ERD, the entity relationship diagram in dbdiagram.io. It's a very nice website, plugging it just because it's nice and useful. And then when I would go to transform that into the schemas and the migrations, it worked, but I always felt like, okay, I'm following something by the book. And what if I change something? And when I change something, things broke. Has many, belongs to. I mean, it's not that difficult in the end, especially hopefully the way that the book explains it is it makes it clear. But it always nagged me that I'm following the happy path. And I do not know what will happen if I mean, how can this thing break? Like how far can it break? What could I do differently? Let's explore how this works. And at some point, after doing a lot of projects, I mean, you don't want to see my self-hosted Git. I run Git and now Forjo. After many projects, I said, enough of that, copy-paste work. Let's sit down and take a database that is laid out properly and it's simple enough, and try to model it with Ecto. And I started doing this. At some point, I realized, well, I'm doing this anyway for myself. and it seems to help me along to understand how this works. So why don't I just write a couple of chapters? I was familiar with LeanPub, also great service, great website, great people too. I mean, fantastic people. I really like working with them, and I just published 2 chapters in April 2024, and the pickup was massive. And I thought, okay, this is now my weekend project, and for almost an entire year, with the exception of 4 months in between the summer where I was too busy with other things, I kept updating it and I kept exploring and I kept building it out. And at some point, it became so. At some point, the aspiration was not anymore just to represent Northwind Traders, but to also use my Elixir skills, which were all the time growing because I had been programming a lot, also over the summer, to teach things that I had learned. So, for example, there is a chapter in the book where we import the Northwind Traders database, and you can either do this manually and say import this table, the customers table, the orders table, or you can say, well, I don't care. I don't want to be manually entering the table name before I import it. I just want to have import all, and it will automatically determine in which order the tables need to be inserted. So suddenly I found myself writing an algorithm for determining the order, and then it turned out a few chapters later that it had a bug. So then I wrote a depth first search in Elixir, following the Wikipedia page, the pseudocode in Elixir, but to determine the order in which you build up and tear down the table. So the book started off as Elixir, Ecto, and SQLite, and became something more like, okay, now you can learn or you can practice Elixir, but also learn those things. So it is a bit of a I would say, a recap, application of basic and a bit more advanced Elixir skills. And you learn database modeling in the process. And you have to fight SQLite only twice. You have to fight SQLite because it's not as featureful as Postgres. So it's been a weekend project, a fun one, and I learned tons from it. Like after my fingers, I was telling my friends, my fingers are flying, like elixir is flowing out of my fingers on the keyboard after spending so many hours, reworking the chapters and making sure that it all flows more sensibly, because I had to write 2 chapters from scratch almost, because the way that everything had been developed was, it worked, but it had a lot of back and forth between them. And that's how the book came to be. And so far has received good to excellent feedback. And I'm happy to take this further because it seems to be something that's missing. I mean, there are many great books about Elixir. There are few books overall about Elixir, I would say, compared to what you can do with Elixir. And there are tons of tutorials online or short blog posts saying, here's how you do this, here's how you do that. And I always approach things from an exploratory angle. So it seems that this has been something that people appreciate.
Yeah, no, I love that. And what's great is, there are few books in Elixir, right? But I think we're really lucky that the ones that exist are amazing.
Yeah, they're
because
really good.
I really haven't ran across a bad Elixir resource yet. And I think that says a lot about the Elixir community and the knowledge base that everyone is sharing, which is pretty cool.
I think important is also to admit that different people have different ways of learning. For example, I went through Programming Ecto, which is an excellent book, but for me personally, it's not the way I learn. Programming Ecto is very completionist, very regimented. You go through it and you know all of Ecto basically.
Yeah.
But that's a lot. So before I apply it on something that I use, so if I don't apply what I learn on something that I need to learn, I need to solve, knowledge comes in and a very small part remains in the brain. So the way that this book is written is to say, well, we have a mission, is to model this thing and to run queries on it. And difficult to do. Let's see what we need to use. If we need to use something, we'll use it. We are not covering all of Ecto, but if you have gone through those basics, then the documentation is just one step away. So you can build out anything else you need.
I like that. I feel like our approach to teaching is very similar, because when I started my YouTube channel, we were talking about this before we went live. It was
Yeah.
originally back end stuff, and I started it because I was like, there aren't many resources outside of books and things.
Mhm.
And I know like when I first started programming, I really enjoyed video tutorials and kind of like the hand walking, right? Like you like being shown how to do things, but also you don't really have to deep dive into things that you're not using. So I kind of like to teach like, hey, we're going to build something useful and we're
Mhm.
only going to touch on the things that we touch on. And like, there's no need to dive deep into things we're not going to use yet, because I feel like that can overwhelm your knowledge pipeline, however you're
Exactly.
learning, you know?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I like that. And what I think is funny too is, so Isaac and I have very similar backgrounds. He's a mechanical engineer, I'm a structural engineer, and we both actually have worked for family businesses that have kind of formed us onto our software path from
Yeah.
various things. And I think that's really cool because I kind of started doing mechanical engineering work and like electrical engineering stuff
Mhm.
because I would rip out old hydraulic pumps and replace them with vector motors and PLCs and all these things. And I started doing like the drag and drop, like ladder logic, just
Yeah. I
timers.
know. I know. I know. Yeah.
Yeah, just timers and latches or switches. And I was like, I want to do more. I started teaching myself how to program, and I started a lot with Java,
Mhm.
unfortunately, and then slowly moved into JavaScript, Swift, and eventually ended up here using Elixir. And now I don't want to do anything
Well,
else.
fun fact is I started with Basic exactly where I'm sitting now, because this apartment used to be the first office of the family business, and here where I'm
Nice.
sitting, there used to be a 286 or 8086 way back in the 1980s or late 80s, I guess. And I would to just do for loops and make the sound of make the beeps go higher as if you are revving an engine. Uh, then I didn't do much for years when I was in high school. Then I did a lot of, well, C and C++ in my studies, but super superficially, like not really programming something complex, just algorithms. And then when I was doing R&D work, I got into Python, and that was seen back in 2009 as being something weird in the world of mechanical engineering because it was all Fortran and C,
Hmm.
C++ for simulation codes. And I automated the heck out of everything with Python because I found the R&D work to be drudgery. Like you sit there and you input new parameters for the turbine shape, you run it through a program that will generate some geometry. This will take maybe 1 minute to give you a very simple estimate of how well the turbine will perform, and then you take the geometry, then you manually create a 3D model and you mesh it, and then you send it off to the cluster, and then you wait for 18 hours to see how well your design performs. I said, this is just stupid. At the very least, I should let an algorithm run the fast simulation, give me an allegedly optimal design, and I'll take the allegedly optimal design, and then I'll wait for 18 hours. And for 4 years, everything I touched, like I didn't want to any more input or do manual labor, and that's how I got into Python. In retrospect, the Python I was writing was very, very functionally written. No classes, no objective oriented programming in that sense. Also, as engineers, we don't usually put much emphasis into becoming great software developers. Just want the code to work. And then for many years, I didn't do anything. Then again, I touched Python because I did a startup with machine learning because I was doing a lot of machine learning as an R&D guy. And then the skills became dormant for a while until in the family business, I got fed up with manual labor for offers, for inventory, for product items and all that. And I sat down over a full week. I used Fast API in Python, and I automated the core process of the business. And that came after failing with Django, which I found super weird to work with because it is because object-oriented programming in my mind, I'm not dissing it, but it has too much abstraction. way too much abstraction. Like you have to, when you pick up Django, which is great, or fast API is simple, but Django is also great, gives you a great admin interface. But then when you want to actually implement something complex, you need to first understand how the guy who wrote Django, or the team, think about how they structure their classes and the objects. And so you don't actually learn Python, you learn Django, and you get into the brain of the maintainer. Whereas I feel with Phoenix, even though it has a DSL and even though it has its peculiarities with the plugs and so on, it's way more straightforward. And I like straightforward things. I don't want to think in 1,000 abstractions. That's why I also like Ecto. Ecto is very straightforward once you get the hang of it.
Yeah,
and so
I agree.
Again.
Oh, no, go ahead and finish. Sorry.
No, I was just saying that eventually a friend of mine, he comes from academia and he programs in Scala professionally. And he was telling me all about functional programming. And it was a discussion in the summer of 2022. And soon thereafter, I installed Elixir on my Debian Linux and I played through some exercise on exorcism and followed some tutorials. And from the moment I saw the pipe operator, I got hooked. This was the moment, yeah, because it worked in my mind like my old HP calculator with the RPN, where you say 1, enter 3 plus, this kind of prefix notation. And since then, I've been trying to program everything I can in Elixir, even though you lost me again.
Oh,
yeah,
you did. We can still hear you, but we lost your video.
Something's weird's happening with this webcam. So yeah, I'm back.
There you are.
What was I saying? So soon thereafter, I got into Elixir and started programming, and I tried to program only in Elixir, though it's not possible because I'm also paid to program an app in PHP and XJS now for the past many months. But coming back to Elixir is always a breath of fresh air because it's so much cleaner. Everything's so much cleaner. In Phoenix Live, you work on the back end. You don't have to deal with pinging back and forth between a back end and a front end and JSON wrangling and all that. It's just a great programming language, and the community is amazing.
I agree. Yeah, the things that got me hooked before I really truly understood, all the power of OTP, it was the pipe operator, and then when I wrapped my head around pattern matching, that was the game changer as well.
Yeah. There are some things that I used only later. For example, the with construct, and I have an app that I haven't released, which what it does is it pulls a Norwegian meteorological service, and then it checks to see you want to get your weather data for a location. The location can be shared among different. So if you want to get in a geohased grid, you can have multiple locations within that grid. You don't need the resolution of 100 meters. The weather is not going to be different between that apartment and the other apartment. And then it follows with I guess you could call it a monad, where there's a pipeline that says maybe, so this is a location, maybe fetch the data location, maybe fetch the weather, maybe. So you start with something that is just a tuple of latitude, longitude, and you have a bunch of maybe do this, maybe do that, maybe persist in the database, maybe report, maybe process. In the end, it's all transparent and you get something shoved in the database. And the more I played with Elixir and I learned to use its constructs, the more I maybe sometimes I overuse them. For example, when I discovered enum.reduce, everything was enum.reduce for a while. You know how
I feel like that's how it goes, right?
Yeah, or reduce while. Yeah, of course I will do the reduction.
That's why I tell everyone coming from like object-oriented programming languages don't rush into gen servers because you're going to use them wrong.
Yeah, and I did for a while. And then I had an application. So last summer I was busy with exactly that. I'm running a startup for property management in Greece, focused only on Greece. And we had an idea with a co-founder to do something for the top line growth. So yeah, we give you a software if you're a property manager that helps you to increase your operational efficiency of your office. But so far we haven't given you something to to grow your business. So the idea was to create a directory of property managers. And I had a decision to make before I decided to jump into professionally developing software for money. I said, let's try to make this in Phoenix Live View. And I went through 6 weeks of frantic work, half of July and all of August. And I pulled out all the stops, like gen servers, live components, forms, multi-step forms. It was an incredible learning experience. And the gen server is a tricky one because once you learn it, you say, well, everything can be a gen server.
Yeah, that's the problem, right?
And
That's
then
the
you start
trick.
to think object-oriented.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then you start to think like as if the gen server is an object that does things for you. And if you do this, it becomes a bottleneck because everything goes synchronously through one bottleneck.
Yeah.
But the language gives you so many amazing things that you can work with. Like I cannot find something right now that I could not do with Elixir. This camera is problematic. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine.
I'll switch camera. The external one is not working. There we are, lower resolution, but
That's all right.
worse lighting, but works.
I feel like we're video is struggling with bandwidth today as well. But as long as we can see you and hear you, we're good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I agree. I think you can't really there's nothing that you can't use Elixir for. I think it's pretty much a good solution for everything, at least like with back-end API work. Now I'm curious when I think like data architecture and like figuring out schemas and relationships and everything you do between database tables, and I think it's a hard skill to learn, and it's kind of one of those things you can't really learn without creating a bunch of projects, and you slowly learn how to lay things out. And like I'm curious, how do you approach that piece of it in your book? Do you
given that the database schema is already given from Northwind Traders, there are some thoughts about how you could build it out, but we don't do anything that's way out of the schema. We add one more table for countries, and we import data from a CSV file.
Okay.
But we don't do any re-architecting in terms of changing the country is hard-coded. For example, customers, it says United States or Greece or whatever. It doesn't say Greece, it says Germany, France. Greece is not part of the data set. But we don't do this thing where we would normalize by changing the field to a country ID to link it. So the book is not so much about starting from scratch, it's about modeling an existing database. In other cases,
okay, I see.
Yeah, in other cases, I mean, I don't know. When I was trying to learn Ecto and Phoenix and so on, I don't know how many projects and how many different ERDs I built, and I stumbled again on misunderstandings that I had about Ecto, because it had also been a long time since I learned databases in my studies. But now that I'm doing more and more complex things, I find it's really useful to start small. And so think big, but start small. Like what I do is I lay it out on a diagramming software, and I think about what else might come. And I try to not make it a tangled mess, because that's the biggest risk you can have, because you can have so many different tables, and you can normalize to an extent where you will need to join so many things, and you don't need to make it that complex. And then I try to zoom into, okay, what do I need for the first version? Because my biggest fear, honestly, has always been migrations with data in the database. This worried me, and that's why there's one chapter in the book where we change the field of the price, of the product price, from a float to an integer. And that's super simple. but it is a litmus test of, yeah, it's okay, don't worry, you have data in database, you don't need to discard it and re-import it. You can switch it with SQL, do 2 migrations, and first convert the price in a new field and then rename the field. And so I would say aim to avoid useless migrations. If you can avoid them, if you can predict, if you can run ahead a bit and see, well, I might need this. So if I end up doing this in the future, I will need to migrate. So let's try and build the core to not have to change that as much, because it will change at some point. As it grows, you will need to change it. I guess I haven't stumbled onto it, but you might need to change it for performance reasons. Yeah, so that's how I approach it. It's I try to avoid deciding. It's avoid deciding too early. It's like a Toyota second paradox. Delay decision making until the moment you have to make the decision, but forecast what kind of decisions might I need to make.
Yeah.
And then defer it until it becomes necessary.
I think people underestimate the power in planning as well. And it's just like when you're creating a product, right? You want your MVP to be as few features as possible. And that's what you want your database to be as well. Like, you only want data that you need, and you really want to think through, like, should this be in its own table? Can this be a column? Do query speeds matter? Like, how often am I grabbing this data? And like, there's a lot that goes into the layout of your database architecture.
I think it's a bit of the whole story about, I mean, okay, it's not about Elixir specifically, but I think it's worth mentioning is that the whole agile and MVP mindset, there is a downside to it, where people start to say, well, I don't need to plan, I just do. And if you just do, you're not doing agile, you're merely doing rework and rework and rework. So you do and redo and redo, and you are doing things that you could have just as well avoided.
Is that called I think, is that waterfall?
Waterfall is a nice, what do you call it? It's a scarecrow. People put it up, and I don't think that anybody ever does waterfall, not even in hardware anymore. But people do a lot of rework in agile too. And I've done a lot of product development and some product management, and the whole point is to go fast. I mean, we developed a handheld radar to see in walls in 12 months.
Wow.
And 12 months for software and hardware. Of course, we based it on something that already existed, so we didn't do fundamentals research for everything from scratch. But the idea was there to have a clear product vision and to always work with constraints, like with trade-offs. Like, how big should the antenna be, for example? Well, I don't need to fix it. I don't need to say it's going to be so many centimeters by so many centimeters. I give a range to the engineer, and he needs to give me trade-off curves. Like, if the antenna is larger, then it has a different center frequency, and then the performance is different, and then kind of it's something that converges towards something that works. And in software engineering, the way I think of it is run ahead a bit, as I say, put down what your product vision is. So yeah, okay, you do an MVP, but it's good to know where you might end up. Like, already bake in some things in the concept that will allow you to go to MVP version 2, version 3, whatever, to the full product without having to redo everything, because redoing everything is super expensive and always comes with bugs, always. And with migrations. That is, I'm not in the middle of something, actually. Yeah.
Migrations can be very difficult, especially if you're changing types and altering data with them, right? There's a big difference with just adding a column versus migrating data.
Yes, because you need to ensure that everything that you migrated got converted correctly. And it doesn't even need to be a migration in the sense of Ecto migration, where you add columns. It can even be a different way of organizing data. For example, in the app, I'm going to release a new version of this brick.gr web app, where we have disparate. So we have the ability to upload files, attachments to a property, to a tenancy, to tasks, and so on. And the way it was developed for the MVP, and it was okay for the MVP. I mean, I'm not talking badly about it. It was done pragmatically, let's say, is that every entity has its own embedded schema, if you were to put it in Ecto lingo, for the attachments. It's a repeater field in WordPress ACF Pro now, details. And now the idea is to be able to do file management across all properties, across everything. So you need to have a file manager somewhere. So now comes the difficult task of re-architecting everything to refer to a new table, which has files, their S3 path and their file size and their object type, so octet stream or whatever it is, the content type. And that is not technically difficult, but making sure that everything will migrate successfully so that you can then go to the front end and change around every place where you upload a file, that it works correctly with a new concept, that is not trivial. It's not technically difficult, really. It's simple. But you need to make sure that the simple thing you want to build actually works. And if you have already data, that's, you get this gut feeling that I should not mess it up. But of course, you don't do it in production. You do it in a staging environment.
Well, and just with changing data, and then if you're not just limited to like web applications, you have to think about like backward compatibility because people don't update their apps, and it can get tricky.
Yeah, and I find that is the biggest problem with the split between front end and back end, which you can avoid with when you do Elixir.
Yes, if everything's a web app, right, everything updates when you tell it to.
That was my another aha moment I had. I wrote an app, one of my trial balloon apps that I wrote. I have published it, but not to the full extent. It's an app in Elixir that downloads the changelogs of the Linux kernel. Then it parses them into separate commits, shoves them in an SQLite database, and then you have the standard boilerplate Phoenix live view with a list. You can add new changelog, which version, this version, it downloads it, it stores it, and then you can say process commits. And it was an aha moment when I was able to trigger the update of a live component that show you how many commits are in the database from EX. It blew my mind. I mean, I knew it can do it, but to see it live and to see the number go up, it's always fascinating. That
that's
you didn't
cool.
need to touch anything on it. It's really cool. Yeah.
Now, I haven't played much with SQLite or SQLite. What made you like go that route? Is it just is it a database you prefer using, or is it just kind of the easiest to get up and running without having to like have a separate instance or anything running kind of thing?
I mean, the spinning up a Docker container with Postgres is trivial. Even if you hosted bare metal, which I do, it's also pretty trivial. What is not so trivial is to make it work in a clustered setup. This is something I'm still working on to learn and to do it properly. For the things I've been programming that I have a very small scale, I find that it's overkill to go to Postgres if you can avoid it. And there is a certain feeling of simplicity when you have everything in a single file. Okay,
that is
2
nice.
or 3.
I do
the wall. You have 3 files. You have the shared memory. You have the DB. You have the DB SHM, which is some kind of like a paging file, and the write ahead log. But anyway, you have files on the drive. Whereas in Postgres, it's some weird hierarchy, opaque, and that's the one reason. The other reason is I used SQLite extensively, but not with complex setups when I was doing R&D, because the way it worked is you would send a finite element calculation to calculate turbines or shafts or whatever, and you would get a multi-gigabyte file back from the cluster. And there was a software suite that we're using where you could load the database file, as it was called, with the results from the calculation, and then you could run a very simple analysis on the nodes to see where the stresses or the strains are high. And I had to do some calculations that require me to get access to every node and to pull data from every node to calculate fatigue and so on, like technical stuff. And I couldn't figure out how to do it with a GUI. So I did a dump of the whole thing into SQLite, and then I would run SQL queries across the nodes and say, well, find me all the nodes where the strain X is so much and the strain Y is so much. And so I learned SQLite in 2000. I learned SQLite. I mean, it's not something difficult to learn, but I played with SQLite first time in 2010. And I still remember it's like a very reliable workhorse for such cases.
Well, and it's great for small projects, especially like if you're not planning on hosting thousands and thousands of users and having like, a billion records, it's a really good option.
Well, in fact, there's a guy who posted on Hacker News. He has 6.4 terabytes in a single SQLite.
Whoa.
Yeah, but the thing is, his application is read heavy. I think that's the thing that kills you. If you don't have multiple concurrent writes, then you should not go with SQLite. That's at least my takeaway from everything.
That makes sense.
But if you have a read heavy application, or if you have data that doesn't change much, for me, SQLite is like my like a spreadsheet in a way. What I like to do is to take CSV files, import them into SQLite, things that don't change that much, and then I have a database. I have a spreadsheet in a file that I can access programmatically and run queries without bothering too much about setting up Postgres and backing it up and so on. It's quite handy. And the other reason why I use it for the project is because I wanted to explore something that has constraints. I think you learn the most when you have to do things under constraints. Then you need to be creative.
Agree.
So there is no support for alter column in SQLite. So when you want to change the type of a column, like the price from float to integer, you need to create a new column and then do another migration and then rename the column. So it's all a bit, there's no support for named constraints. So when you do validate constraint, you cannot validate foreign key constraints in Ecto with SQLite the way you do it with Postgres.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
SQLite will not, so SQLite, the client, but it's because of SQLite, will not return to you the constraint name that was violated. So you roll up your sleeves and you create a new custom validation function, which we do in the book, that reports the proper error and the field name, so that you can have a validation of that the foreign key actually exists, the foreign key ID exists in the database. So it was done also as a excuse in a way to see how far you can push it, deal with the consequences, see what works, what doesn't. And there are some things that work really badly. Like, for example, there's no support for interval. So if you want to do a rolling or like apply a window function to calculate the moving average of orders, or the value of orders across dates, you cannot do it in the same easy way as in Postgres. So there's a whole lot of, you need to do a lot of things, and SQLite is not happy at all with those things. The queries are super slow, but then this gives you an excuse in the book to learn about profiling queries, explain the query plan, understand where the bottlenecks are coming, learn how to profile functions with a timer module of Erlang. I mean, it's all done for the purpose of learning and exploration. That has been the ethos of the book from the beginning.
That's actually really awesome that you run into doing like profiling of queries and like performance, because I feel like that's like, it's something I've never had to think about or experience, especially at like a small scale project. And for you to like kind of be able to replicate that with this project, I think that's like, that's awesome. Like people that are reading your book are going to be getting knowledge so much earlier in their career, because otherwise you don't deal with that stuff till you have to, like, because you have scaling issues, or you start dropping connections to your database because queries are taking too long. And
the idea is not to become an expert in query planning and so on. I am not an expert. What I do is I say, well, this is running super slow. Let's make some changes. Oh, yeah, it now runs even slower. But why?
yeah.
So let's drop the distinct call, to get the distinct dates. Oh, now it's super fast. Yeah, but we get the wrong results. So there's a whole lot of playing around with the way you formulate the query, because it has 3 sub queries, a recursive CPE and so on. And then you say, well, okay, what can we use to understand why this thing is slow? And it's not going to teach you how to profile a query, but it plants the flag to say, well, if you ever stumble across something like this, there is a tool that you can use. You can also profile them with benchmarking. There are some trade-offs that happen when you pick SQLite. And you know in the future that you can refer back to it. And you have planted the flag, as I say, to know that this can be done. And you need to be a bit of like a Sherlock Holmes to figure out why it's slow or why it's not as fast as you expected. And the finding is doing that kind of a query with SQLite, at least the way I had the idea to implement it, is not something that SQLite is happy about. But that's okay. I mean, we had to come to the last chapter, chapter 16, the penultimate chapter. The last one is has ideas for where to take this further. But we go through the full book, and we stumble across two situations where SQLite is not as easy as Postgres, and that's actually fantastic. I imagine it's what many people consider a toy database, because that's what everything uses on your phone to store data. You can take it so far, and when you start to do complicated queries with recursive table expressions and all that, then yes, you have an issue. Well, I consider this a win. That's not a problem.
Yeah. Well, I think it's very important to know, like, a lot of people just pick the popular choices for tech stacks, right? When they're building a product. And it's good to get your hands dirty and to know limitations of certain aspects of your stack before you are really tied into a decision down the road. Because, well, like, for instance, like MySQL versus like Postgres, like, do you know what limitations you'll run into choosing those two databases? It's important homework to do, and it all depends on use cases of your app and how many read queries versus write queries, how you want to query data, how are you filtering things, and it's good to start thinking about those things early on.
And you're probably not going to need to make that distinction between, for example, MySQL and Postgres until your app is so successful that then it's a nice problem to have.
Then it's also a really hard problem.
It's a hard problem also, but then you should have the money to invest in it. But to delay, for example, a product launch because you are deliberating over this framework or that framework or this database, the other one, I think it's just you can consider it premature optimization, but there's a whole tendency in the software development world to become fascinated with something or to become entrenched in a choice.
Get stuck with the planning instead of the doing, right?
Yes, or to impose. So to make the choice of something that which determines the success of the project. Like, for example,
premature optimization and things like that.
And I've done it. I've done it myself.
Me too.
It's very difficult to not do it.
So when you're an engineer, you want everything to be perfect from day one, right?
But it never is, and there is unfortunately a lot of I call it chicken clacking online.
I like that.
You go on Hacker News and somebody mentions MySQL and people go, oh, why would you use MySQL when you have Postgres? I mean, MySQL runs, I don't know how many, who knows, millions or billions of installations. You're probably not going to succeed or fail because you chose the one or the other.
Yeah, and I mean, no matter what you choose, you're always going to run into like a weird little like nuance with either one, you know, like you're not going to avoid it.
Yeah, and that's a part of the mindset. The book is the engineering ethos. This, yes, we want to do this perfectly from the start. That's the aspiration. The reality is you knock your head against the wall until you break through.
Yeah.
And there are a couple of points in the book where we have to advance backwards, as I call it, and go and fix things because, the prioritization of the tables here was, I note down in chapter 10 that, well, it seems to work, but ideally would have done it with an algorithm. Doesn't seem to be needed. Well, a few chapters later, I didn't know this at the time. This problem would bubble up, and that's why we do a depth-first search to determine the proper order of the table importing process. But that's okay. That's also part of I mean, the book tries to convey a mindset also, not just Elixir. It's
Yeah.
you'll figure it out, and it's almost like talking to myself, because I often want to do it right the first time, which is
Right, but you can't see everything. You can't see into
exactly.
the future, right? You don't know. Like what I think today could be completely wrong tomorrow, depending on like shifting of the use case or just possibly just querying performance, or maybe you're
Yeah.
using your data differently and you just have to shift.
Or maybe a new feature comes in, and you need
Yeah,
to,
exactly.
like this document management feature was not planned. It was never planned. It was never foreseen that we would need to do something like this. But it turns out that it's an important feature. Well, okay, this breaks a lot of assumptions that we've made in the modeling of the database. Okay, I say if you can apply your mind to something, the beauty about programming is, barring physical constraints, like physics constraints, you will figure it out somehow. You will do it.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not as performant as you wanted. Maybe it's not as pretty as you wanted. Maybe it doesn't conform to the best practices or the sexiest way of doing it. But if it works in the end and the customer or the user is happy, you've achieved the goal. Then you can start to look into making it pretty fast, if you can make it prettier and faster.
Yep.
Prettier usually goes well. Faster, not always.
Yeah. Well, like how many times I feel like it's a little less in the software world, but I remember when I was building hardware and machinery, being the architect and the builder, you build it a certain way, right? And then the
Mhm.
second you let someone else test it or take it for a test drive, you're like, they're using it in a completely different way than like my original intentions. And they find all these edge cases and instantly break things. And that
Yeah.
is, that's what's fun about being an engineer, right? Because you don't see different paths a lot of times when you're building something. And then you learn
I mean,
to shift or avoid the wrong path, right?
I think it has to do with how much you let form over function rule the game. I was watching a
Yeah.
video 2 days ago about the iPhone 4. How, remember the iPhone 4? You're holding it wrong, because when you're holding it like this, the antenna
Oh
gets
yeah. And the famous
and
Steve
then
Jobs
you see
line is just don't hold your phone that way.
exactly. Or I mean, the older ones might remember the Nokia. What was a Nokia phone that was also a handheld gaming console, the Taco, which you had to hold like this. Remember?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know if you've seen it. It's a weird one.
I
And
kind of want to look it up
I mean,
now.
form can take. Yeah, yeah, there was a whole meme about this, that you're holding the taco against your ear.
Oh
And I think that
yeah,
if
I
you,
remember this.
yeah, yeah, it was funny. It was a ancient meme by now. But form can take different
Yeah,
forms.
that is funny.
I mean, the form can be the design, form can be the architectural choices that you said, and in the end, developing a product is about, or developing software, developing anything that has uncertainty is about managing the uncertainty. And if you don't manage it correctly, you will overcomplicate things, or you will lock yourself into something that backs you into a corner. And then to come out of those corners can sometimes be super expensive. And in hardware, we both know. I mean, in software, you change the code, then it's fine. But in
Hmm.
hardware, if you have, I don't know, plastics, injection molding, or uh, cast
Yeah.
cast turbines, or machine shafts, or things that cost a lot of time, not only money, but a lot of time to process, there you are not anymore so, fluid with, yeah, it's okay, let's be agile, we'll figure it out later. No, you have to
Yeah.
figure out, if
Yeah,
you
you
need to
can't
figure
really
it out.
be agile with parts, can you?
Hmm? Sorry, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I said you can't really be agile with parts, can you? With physical parts, not so easily. A little
You
bit
can't
with
really.
like 3D printing, but that's about it.
Yeah, well, what 3D printing does is allows you to speed up the feedback loop between the design and
Yep.
whether it works. But in the end, it's all about. I mean, people use and abuse the term agile a lot. It's something I've been rambling about had been rambling about for years. Even wrote books on this. But after I saw that the agile community doesn't change its mind, because it's a certification game,
Yeah.
I stopped talking about this. It's just nonsense. because if you want to engineer something or develop anything, you need to manage I prefer to say you need to manage your knowledge gaps. Like there are some things I know, and I don't want to quote Donald Rumsfeld, who probably was not the best person ever, but he had this fantastic quote, which is an epistemological quote about the known knowns, the known unknowns, the unknown knowns, and the unknown unknowns. I don't know if you've heard this. That there are some things that you know.
Yeah.
There are some things you know. Okay, nail them down. You don't need to bother with them. Of course, qualify whether what you know is actually true. Then there are some things that you know you don't know. Okay, now you know what to research. There are some things that you don't even know you know, and that's what happens in big companies, and I've seen it firsthand. Like there are companies where they don't even know what they know. They don't know that this guy has knowledge about this topic or about this framework or about this process or whatever. And so it's good for a company to map what it knows every now and then. And what kills you is usually what you don't even know you don't know.
Yeah, that's true.
Which is chapter 16 of the book, where I had no idea. I mean, I knew that, at the beginning, I didn't know that SQLite doesn't support interval. Then I knew that SQLite doesn't support interval, but I had no idea that SQLite, with this complicated setup to replicate the interval function, is so abysmally underperforming. And that's okay. You will always find things that you don't know, but that's why you need to pull things forward and map all those 4 quadrants, so that at least you don't slap your hand on the head like a Picard facepalm and say, "Oh my God, I should have read that book, or listened to that podcast, or talked to that guy, or asked for a second opinion." And that's a problem with development.
What do you do though when you know something but you forget you know?
Yeah, that's a human condition, I would say.
I've gotten into this habit of, one, if I have to do it manually more than like 3 times, I'll usually automate it with a script. But I have so many notes written that it's like turning into almost like an encyclopedia of like daily development tasks kind of thing, or, Docker notes, Git notes, like things where I just have to go and refresh my mind. I have it all just organized. Otherwise, I don't remember.
Yeah, I keep in every project I keep a notes.md file in the Git. I keep notes.md. So readme.md is beyond the standard one that Mix creates. Is if you come back to this later, here's how you get it running, or here's what you need to take care of. Source this environment file, or run this first, or migrate this. So things that I am not going to keep in mind. Yeah. Then I have a file on notes, generic things specific to this project, and I have always a features file. That's how I manage features. I do not bother with Kanban boards and Jira tickets and all that stuff. I try to keep it as simple as possible. So like a markdown file, flat and everything. And I write done then, or deferred, or postponed, or to do, or not going to be done. And still that leaves a lot of gaps across projects where I don't do it yet diligently. I would like to get in the habit of documenting these as blog posts. But if you have so many things to do...
Yeah, that's a good
idea.
Yeah. Well, like I mentioned this a lot, but like Peter Ulrich always talks about like micro blog posts. And when you have that format and it's just out there, right, it becomes a good daily reference for you. Like if you're doing something like, oh, I wrote a small blog post about this, and you don't have to dig through projects. But I do something similar with markdown files as well. In larger projects, I'll always have like a documentation directory. And so I'll have my like root level README. And then for like digging in deep, I'll just link things to like, and here's how you deploy it, have a whole deployment README, and then whatever. And then however you build on it, you can just fill up your documentation directory.
The other thing I do now for the past 1 year is I have, there's an app on Linux at least, it's probably also there for Windows and Mac, which is called Zim. And it's like a desktop wiki. I guess people nowadays use Notion and some other thing. I don't remember. And you just have, it's like a tabbed interface for different files. So for every project, I will have a file. and I will dump things, or every deployment or every server or every subscription I have, or I just dump it there. So I have something that I can refer to without caring where that file is, and it all gets backed up automatically, so I don't ever lose anything. Everyone finds their way. There's no one way to do it.
Yeah, I use Obsidian for a lot of my daily notes and things,
Obsidian,
and that's really nice. And it's like anything that supports Markdown, you'll keep my attention, because it's usually then everything. Like if I write a README in Obsidian, I can just copy and paste it to an MD file, and you're just good to go.
The book is written in Markua. That's Leanpub. That's Leanpub's. I mean, it's open. The specification is open source of Markua. It's a Markdown variant that supports asides and different.
Okay.
Yeah, and so after writing so much Markua or Markdown for the book, it became all second nature that when I start to write the name of a function, I tap the backtick. So you get into the habit. But having everything in Markdown, which when you render it in HTML looks pretty, I think it goes a long way towards making that knowledge reusable by others. You don't have to have one representation which is for documentation and one for presentation.
Yeah. I'm curious, when you're writing, do you write in just an IDE then at that point, or how do you write?
Well, initially I was writing in Leanpub's online editor.
Okay.
But when I wanted to start quality assuring things, I moved the files into a Git, and then I used Codium, the open source build of without telemetry of VS Code, and I wrote it there, and that gives you a very handy Markdown preview that is good enough. And I write in VS Code essentially.
Awesome. And then you can use Git and Git, and yeah, that's great. Like,
yeah, and you have all the commits. Yeah, it's all flat file. At some point, I've been thinking of switching to, well, not for Leanpub, but if I publish somewhere else to I think it's called ASCII doc.
Okay.
Yeah, but I just don't have the time to. I'd rather, I always get. I try as I grow older to stop bothering about tools. Like if something works is good enough for now. If there's a big opportunity to do this across many books, I will investigate at some point to not have to not lock myself into Leanpub, because anyway it's Markdown, so you can somehow convert it to other things with Pandoc.
Yeah. But, well, it's nice to keep everything in your own repositories too, and then you just have access to. It's good to have access to your own stuff,
Yeah, I self-host a lot. That's my pandemic hobby that became almost a business setup now.
Okay. Yeah. I'll go in like waves of loving doing everything self-hosting, and then I'll go through these like minimalist things where I'm like, I don't want to run a server or anything, so I'll just, have my droplet on DigitalOcean. But I go back and forth.
I go through bouts where I do this a lot, and I love deploying things and setting things up, and because this is a bit of a design phase when you it's almost like world building. I have those servers. This one is powerful. This one is less powerful. This one has more RAM, less RAM, SSD or not. In this location, I have 5 locations where I have servers now, and some things are synchronized between them. And so I go through those phases where I design things and I switch things around, and I love to make it work. And then I don't want to touch it until the next bout comes in maybe 1 year, where I find that, a new server was added, and now maybe it's time to reshuffle. But to be honest, since I found Proxmox VE.
Oh, yeah.
Everything is Proxmox VE. Everything. And that worries me. That worries me, because it's one of the few times where I lock myself into something that is freely available, but I had a discussion with a friend. He's also amazed by Proxmox, and he was saying, what happens if one day this is not anymore free? I said, yeah, okay, you will always have the old versions. Yeah, but don't you worry that we're getting locked ourselves into something that works fantastically well, but to replicate it with other tools, it is a big pain. And yeah, it's what worries me. But I try to ignore that worry, because if you worry about making everything self-hosted, you will do nothing besides tending to servers. And at some point, you have to draw a line and say, well, okay, fine, DigitalOcean, Hetzner, wherever. I have to have some dependencies, at least minimize the surface of the dependencies so that you do not lock yourself into 1,000 subscriptions, which I also hate.
Dude, and it's an easy slippery slope, and then before you
Oh
know it, you're like,
yeah,
why am I spending $1,000 a month on all these different tools that I don't really need?
and things get better and better. That's the thing. Like even for LLMs, with it's one of the most amazing things that in 2022, in December 2022, when ChatGPT came out, uh, nobody ever could have expected that. How many years has been now? So 2.5 years later, 2.5 years later, that you can self-host an LLM that is okay. It's not as good as ChatGPT 4 or whatever or Grok, but it is very good for most things. Like
Yeah.
I've been using this a lot, and there's also a new book that I've been writing on building an Elixir chatbot self-hosted with CPU inference. Right?
Oh, cool.
That's a constraint. Like, okay, you don't have a GPU. We don't want to use a GPU. What can we do with self-hosted models with Olama, with the API of Olama, and only a relatively modern a CPU? And you can
That's
do
cool.
crazy things with that, right? You can
Yeah.
there's a model called IA Expanse, which speaks 32 languages and even does a very good job in Greek, which is useful for the startup that I'm running. And if you were to tell me 2.5 years ago that there would come a day where I could have pretty good summarization and translation and natural conversation in Greek, self-hosted, running on the CPU, I would say, get out of here. This is
Yeah. Yeah. That's
this,
wild.
this you know, the pace is crazy.
Yeah, that's cool. Yeah. Yeah. LLMs, it's wild what they're turning into. And I think like when you start seeing how easy it is and to self-host and have your own models, I think I've talked about this with other guests, but I think we'll start seeing a lot more specialized models, right? Where it's self-hosted
Mhm.
just for your specific startup or product, and it kind of becomes an expert in whatever your customer base is. And
Yeah.
I think that's going to be super powerful for startups and any SaaS company, really.
Yeah, I think that's a way forward too. First of all, people talk more those who know, and I'm not someone who knows, but
I'm not
I
either.
follow people and people who actually know, and they're not the tech bros hyping up AI because they invested in a startup and want
Hmm.
to have an exit. Um, they say that LLMs are a bit of a dead end, that it's not going to lead to AGI and so on. And but at the same time, it's a new screwdriver in the toolkit.
Hmm.
And you can either look at them as a screwdriver that well, now everything needs to have an LLM based functionality sprinkled on top, or you can say, well, what things is my product doing that can be actually assisted by an LLM? For example, for the property management startup, I started working on representing the data of an entity, a property or task or a notification or something that happens, representing it in text. So you take the fields and then you have translation keys and you create a comma separated string that says this apartment is 55 square meters, located in downtown Athens, blah, blah, blah. And so you have a long string and then you throw it onto IA Expanse and say, this is the description of a property. Please generate a classified ad for this apartment, like a
Hmm.
draft, in Greek, and make it attractive for people like this and for students and so on. And it does an excellent job. That's something that is
Hmm.
potentially useful. Might end up being nothing, but that you can do this is is really good. And if you have a specific domain, of course, it would be even better. Like if you have, okay, I'll give you like something that might come for Northwind Elixir Traders is that uh, I've been looking into how I could feed an LLM the text of Northwind Elixir Traders and the code base and make an app that answers questions about the book because the model
Oh,
already knows about Elixir, Ecto, SQLite, knows enough to help you. So if you specialize it on the Northwind Elixir Traders book, you can then ask questions about how else could I do this, or is this query, I don't know, is this implemented correctly, or any other thing you could ask. And it then becomes a domain-specific chatbot. I know a guy who has done this across all of his writings. His name is Bob Emiliani.
Yeah.
You might have seen him on LinkedIn. He posts a lot, and he's a great guy, and he's one of those people who talks a lot about how like agile lean management has really become a fad. And what he did is he hired someone. Her name is Heidi Araya. She's doing such LLM applications, and he gave her all of his writings, and he has written a lot of books. And now he has his chatbot behind a paywall. But for 1 year, he had it freely available. And it's amazing. You can chat with a virtual Bob Emiliani. It responds in the same tone with his knowledge pulled from the books. And because he has such a wide knowledge stored in so many, I don't know how many hundreds of thousands of words, it was an incredible chatbot. Like you could actually learn from the chatbot because it queries. I don't know if it does a RAG or whatever, but
That's
it was
really
very,
cool.
Yeah, it's really cool.
I never thought about that. Like, yeah, you could essentially create like an Isaac chatbot that has all your knowledge from all the books that you've written. I love
All the
that.
blog posts, all the
Yeah,
articles.
yeah.
Yeah. I think those are interesting things. Now, how much of that will become a product, given that the barrier to entry is very low?
Yeah.
I don't know. But so what? I mean, the barrier to entry is very low for anything, web development, everything. And still you see innovation or at least invention happening. Every year there's something new that comes out.
I always talk about how cool it is. Like you can buy a laptop for a couple $100, and what you can do with that laptop is almost endless. Like your return on investment is through the roof if you know how to create products and code and build things, you know?
It's one of the things that people in the software world underestimate. The leverage that a bare bones laptop gives you.
Yeah, it's wild. Like I think about, I mean, like now, like I have an expensive MacBook Pro, but even that, like, you know, you spend almost 4 grand, I feel like now, but still, even the return on investment for that one machine, all the code that I have written and products that I have built, like it's kind of mind blowing when you like sit back and think about that.
Yeah, especially when you come from a family business and you see what goes into. I mean, we're not doing production, we do trading, but we still have to deal with a lot of tangible products. And you need to move things, logistics, organize, coordinate with the supplier, with the customer, with the freight forwarder. But when you see how much effort goes into this kind of work in front of a PC, and compared to what kind of return your investment you would have gotten in terms of equipment and hours to instead program something that has value, that hopefully has value, because you cannot know it from the start. It is mind-blowing.
Yeah, it
It is
is.
something that it's really, people like to use the word leverage a lot, but this is insane leverage. You can
Yeah.
take my favorite laptop is the X220, the ThinkPad X220. I don't know how many I have. I bought them secondhand, so I never run out of ThinkPads.
ThinkPad, that's a good computer, man.
Yeah, so you can buy a 10-year-old laptop, and if you invest your time and energy, and like 80 euros or $80, doesn't matter, it's something double digit, and you can build things that generate hundreds of thousands, 10,000 times the value.
Yeah, yeah.
That happens in no other
Well,
profession.
yeah, stepping back to like I was in the manufacturing space, right? Like you can buy just you have a line of machines essentially that makes one product. And each of those machines in that line are like, you know, throw like a $50,000 price tag on it, $100,000, but you're talking like, you know, $3 to $10 million in one line to build like one product. And yeah, it's wild.
It's the same thing with hardware products. Forget about 3D printing. I mean, forget about the 3D printing stuff for a while, like the Kickstarter things and little things that work and so on. Also, electronics, I think it's way better than mechanical stuff. And that's why, if I were to have studied some other branch of engineering, I would have loved to do electronics engineering, because you can build things by yourself. It's not that you cannot learn this, but it's different if you have learned the basics in studies or whether you start to play around and you learn it practicing. And I mean, imagine you want to build a turbocharger for a diesel engine or a gas engine. And we're talking about turbines that are that big, the smallest ones, like those who are petrol heads with your tiny turbines, or the bigger ones. The smallest one is like this. The biggest one is you can stand in it.
Right.
And if you look at the capital investment that it takes and the manpower to go from nothing to having a product, and the lead times, even I used to work for Hilti, which makes construction equipment. The lead time to try out a new configuration of the diamond pattern in the drill bit that goes into the wall to drill a hole, the lead time to qualify that, to test it in the factory, you need to make it, sinter the material, prepare it, make sure it works, send it off to the factory, run it for like 4 weeks to make sure that it works, then send it back.
Yeah.
That's why I say hardware. I mean, yeah, software has a certain degree of difficulty, but hardware is a game for lots of capital. Not that software is not capital intensive, but it's more labor intensive than capital intensive.
Right.
But
Yep.
hardware is just crazy. There are certain categories of products or industries where you don't play if you don't have millions coming out of your.
Well, anytime you have a physical product, it's a complete game changer. Like creating things, physical things, is so difficult.
Yeah, even more difficult to have a physical product and a digital component.
Yes.
And that's why, for example, the classic manufacturers have such a big issue with software. I don't know if you've seen the Volkswagen cars. They want to sprinkle software on top. Like they take a electric car. So first of all, they take a standard car, they make it electric. So they sprinkle electric on it. They used to, now the architecture has changed. But then they sprinkle software on top. There was this famous video on the Volkswagen where when it's updating, you can actually tap I don't know if you've seen this on LinkedIn, you can tap the progress bar. It's a slider. It's a slider UI elements. You can just basically move the progress. It's difficult. And it's difficult because you need to have people communicating who know often nothing of the mindset.
And the problem is you can't have your software, like especially if it's paired with a physical product, it can't be the afterthought.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Like they have to be so integrated and work so well together that it's actually an enjoyable product to use.
I wrote, so fun stories. The last corporate job I had, I got for various reasons. Of course, I came from a similar field and so on, but my foot in the door came because I sent to the executive chairman an article I had written. I was in the habit of writing. That's when I started, 2017, 2016, where I was criticizing exactly that I was saying product focused innovation is a comfort zone. Like if you have a product and your solution to innovation now that was the era of digital, industry 4.0, Internet of Things. And I was making the argument that if you have a product that is the same old product you always have, you just sprinkle data on top without thinking about why should anybody care, what actually it enables, you're just in your comfort zone. And that already exists. Mechatronics, automation, data analysis, that has existed for decades. It's nothing new. So you need to think of your product from the beginning as something that has value as a hardware. For example, radars that the company I used to work for makes. But the software on the iPad needs to be designed from the start to work with that hardware. Exactly. So the one lifts up the other. If you make a perfect hardware and then go to make a software, it could work, but it could also be like I wouldn't say adding what do you call it, lipstick to a pig or polishing a turd.
Yeah.
But you can feel the disparity, like the hardware is great, but the software, or vice versa. The software
and
is great.
So like a great example, like you said, iPad is Apple. They make their software and products work so well together. Like not only do they work well on their hardware, the software all interconnects and you have all your devices connected through their cloud and all of that, and it just works. And so you get locked in that ecosystem, and you don't. Well, even if you want to leave, it makes it difficult to leave. You know.
That's how they get you, and that's why after 2019, when I handed in my corporate iPhone, I had iPhones before,
Yeah.
and I came back to Greece. I said, I'm never going to, never, big word, but never going to get an Apple device again. Even though they are the best in working together. To get my photos out of the iPhone.
Oh yeah.
Yes, I got them, but for some reason, I got them through an iMac. But for some reason, I got them in 5 different resolutions, and I spent weeks cleaning them up with photo comparison software. Everything works until it doesn't. That's the whole concept of becoming a digital serf to this to any company.
I have said that I want to move to Linux and get away from the Apple ecosystem, but then there's like all these little things that I would miss. And it's silly stuff. Yeah. It's like iMessage, because I love having the like iMessage open on my computer and be able to get all my text messages without picking up my phone. And it's like silly things like that. And then like photos is nice, right? You have everything just sync over photos, but when you want to leave, it's a nightmare.
Well, I mean, okay, iMessage, it's famous for having this lock-in effect, even to the effect of perceiving Android people with the green buttons as pariahs, right, in the US.
Well, they refused to update the text protocol as well. They kept everything SMS, I think, and you can't send any high definition photos between Android and Apple. And they just lost a lawsuit like a year or two ago. And so you can finally get the RCTS or whatever the newer protocol is for texting.
RCS.
Yeah. And
probably because of the EU. I mean, one thing the EU does well is
I will say the privacy aspects that come out of the EU is great. And I would like to see the US do more stuff like that, because you should be able to opt out of data collection. It's insane that you can't.
To be frank, though, don't expect that many things in Europe are that different. I had a discussion with a friend of mine. He works for a European company, and I was saying how in Brick.gr we pride ourselves in not tracking, like even the website. When you you go on the website Brick.gr, then you get the typical cookie banner. You have to have the cookie banner, but you know what the cookie banner says is, we don't track you. We don't care about this, right? And honestly, I personally couldn't care less. I think this obsession with data is dangerous. Like you gather. I
agree.
Because many years ago, somebody said data is the new oil, and everybody started hoarding data. And then they realized, okay, what do we do with this data? And then you realize actually you cannot derive any useful insights, or management doesn't want to derive any insights, even though they have the data. But just in case, we might monetize them.
Well, like the danger of over collecting is, one, you're holding on to this data. So if you ever have a data breach, you have that much more stuff that, like, I'm a big believer of, one, don't sell your customers' data, because that's the only reason you would collect more, right? Only collect what you need to make your product better for your customer.
And the other, so the GDPR has this feature called the data processing officer. So you appoint one person of the business who's responsible for overseeing the data processing. How well this works in practice is a different story. Like laws and regulations are okay, but if they're not enforced uniformly, then you have in Greece called polynomia. So polynomy, you have many laws, but so what? Like Greece
I was just gonna say, like,
so what? You can have many laws, but if nobody enforces them, people catch on. They stop following them. It's the same with traffic laws or anything else. And so we're discussing with my friend that it imposes a very high cost of compliance, because especially in some industries where, like in Europe they call it the gaming industry, but it's not video gaming. It's basically what do you call it? Gambling, the electronic gambling industry.
Gambling. We call that gaming here.
Yeah. You call it gaming. Okay. So you have to have everything auditable, and you need to do it ethically. However ethically you can do gambling business is a different story. So it raises the barrier to entry for everyone in the field. But then when you look at who gets a slap on the wrist and who gets punished, you see that if the EU is going to milk Microsoft or Apple, they're doing this. Now come the billions. But you see so many GDPR violations across the European Union that doesn't get tackled, and then you cannot help but become cynical about it. Like, yeah, sure, we have the regulation,
Right.
but I get spammed. I mean, yeah, okay, have Gmail and whatever, and it filters out the spam. But I get so many unsolicited emails because people put me on their list without my consent. So what was the point of GDPR again? Should I now report them somewhere? No, because I have better things to do. It's a bit of a paper tiger, as we call it too. But it's good to have.
Well, it is, but also the problem with overregulation when it's not enforced is they just start using it for their benefit, right? If it could be a money grab. You could just fine a big company, get your tax collection or however you want, your slap on the wrist, but everyone's happy because money was transacted.
That's what's been happening with Apple, no?
Yeah.
So instead of looking at the taxation scheme that Apple and other companies use through Ireland, they look at fines for non-compliance with I don't know, data privacy, whatever, and that's where I think this just breeds cynicism.
Mm-hmm.
In the
I
end,
agree.
The best part about GDPR, in my view, is that alone the fact that you have somebody who is formally responsible for the data hopefully makes that person check themselves before they wreck themselves and the company. And when you don't have that at all, then there's nothing to refer to and say, hey, this is not allowed. So in the US, as I understand it, it's the Wild West. Like, you can collect anything you want, lock people any way you want, process it however you want, resell it. Like, remember Equifax, the whole scandal?
Yeah.
Did anybody face any charges for it? Maybe, I don't know.
I'm not sure if charges. I'm sure there were some fines thrown. Who would probably know is Michael Lubis. I should ask him because he always talks about that data breach, and because it was a big one.
Yeah, it was huge. I mean, leaking. The other thing, having everything in the US depend on a unique identifier, which is the social security number, is by itself a tricky design decision.
No, like, who made that decision? That's wild. It's wild. Yeah.
Yeah, some things are, but it's probably legacy if you think about it.
Yes. It's legacy code. We don't have to worry about it.
Yeah.
It's that magic black box we communicate with. We don't know
what
it does.
Some intern will refactor it one day.
Exactly, right? All right, so Chris asked a question. He said that he's curious about your startup philosophies and some of your previous books. I feel like that's a pretty open-ended question, but I feel like you've mentioned it sounds like you've been part of a lot of startups, or at least
no, not really. I mean, let me count. So one formally.
One? Okay.
One formally, but I've been in a lot of product development projects.
Okay.
In quite a few turnaround projects turnaround projects for process development, product development, hardware and software, and developing the family business, which I took over management of when I returned to Greece 5 years ago. That was it was not really a turnaround, but it was a lot of changes that needed to happen.
What is the family business, if you don't mind me asking?
No problem. It's industrial equipment trading. So equipment for factories that produce solids in the form of powder and bulk solids, and equipment from abroad to manage it and handle it, like to load it, unload it, mix it, dose it, measure its level, anything that has to do with that.
Okay.
So I wouldn't say I have a startup philosophy. I've seen something that resembles waterfall. It never is waterfall. I've lived through a lot of what they call stage gate or phase gate, where you have decision-making gates, and then you do things, and then you decide, should we continue? And that's a trick that the sunk cost fallacy is: the more you continue, the more likely you are to continue. So this by itself is a failure of the mental model. Most projects famously never get killed, so you end up with crappier products than you expected. So I wouldn't say I have a philosophy. The most important thing for me is to not get caught up in fads. That's why I've also been so so critical of agile and even lean. Those are good ideas, but they are perverted as soon as they become a cottage industry, and that's why.
I was gonna say the problem with a lot of them is they get used improperly, right?
Yeah, but then you get into the no true Scotsman fallacy. Like, what is true agile? What is true lean? It doesn't matter. So I'd rather focus on principles. Like, is it a good principle to get competent people and let them work together, but expect them and coach them and support them to work together in a way that makes great things happen? Yes. It's also great to have people on the team who are less experienced, but they can skill up through coaching, exposure to more senior members. This is all part of the story. Forget now about the stupidity of the HR practices of saying you need to have like 5 years in Fast API. The creator of Fast API was posting that 5 years in Fast API, but I created it 1.5 years ago. There's nobody.
Yeah.
Or 10 years in LLMs. What? Who are you?
Yeah.
So I find it more useful to have principles, because principles, then it's up to you to apply them on a situation. If the principle is sound, it will apply differently to different situations, but it will generally be a good rule to follow. That, for example, decide as late as possible. People hear this in management and they grow white hair because they want everything now. Decide how much budget, how much this, what will the product do. But even though it might sound very, very controversial or counterintuitive, once you put it in practice and say, okay, how would we go about deciding as late as possible? Then you start to find a solution applicable for your business, for your product, for your situation, with your people, in your culture, and so on. And then you can turn into a process, into a guidebook, into a hiring practice, into whatever. So I would say the one principle is philosophy is rather look at principles. Don't follow process just because somebody else did it. And always have a product vision before you start. Know that it will probably not be exactly what you want, and manage uncertainty. And not everything has to succeed, and most things fail. And that's part of starting up anything.
I think that's also important to be able to see your idea be a failure and move on from it instead of staying married to it and try to make it work. Because I've been part of startups where they'll try to reinvent their leverage into a market and try to they almost invent a problem that doesn't exist. And you're never going to have a successful project if you're inventing problems. You actually have to be solving problems.
Yeah, though the way it worked for a few years, or for many years, with the zero interest rate policy, I think that's so. In Greek, I call it Silicon Valley NATO. It means like Silicon Valley inspired. Like, throw money at the problem, lots of bells and whistles, lots of Google envy. Remember the time where all the startups were like Google internally, and they had foosball tables and all that kind of frenzy of if we behave like Google, then we are as innovative as Google and we'll raise money and so on. So cargo culting.
We might have
that is a problem. So.
Are you there?
Yeah.
Let me try refreshing you. Oh, we lost Isaac. Oh. Are you back? There you are.
You'll be back. Yeah, it's my connection probably. I see.
Yeah, that's all right.
Now, I was saying that there is a lot in the years of low interest rates or zero interest rates. A lot of this cargo culting happened, and it happened across the whole stack, from the way you hire to the way you deploy. So even whether you had a foosball table or had certain benefits or certain levels or whatever, and this created the perception of a copy-paste ability of approaches between companies. And you can see it in modern software development, where people copy-paste because we might eventually be, that was the saying, right? The new Facebook, or the Uber of X, or the Uber of Y. You don't need it. You're probably never going to reach it. Yeah.
I think that's great advice to wrap this up on. I really appreciate your time, Isaac. It's been awesome chatting. And for everyone that's listening, where's a good spot to find your book? I'll link it all in the show notes afterwards, but it's LeanPub, right?
Yeah, LeanPub in the Elixir category, or if you search for the name, you will find it. It pops up first page on Google. Or you can follow me on LinkedIn, where I sometimes post about it.
Awesome. Yeah. And Isaac's awesome. I'll link his LinkedIn. Are you on X as well? Yes, you are.
Yeah, though I don't use it much, or at all, actually.
Okay. So LinkedIn is the place to find you.
Yeah, that's the place. Unfortunately, but it's a place.
Okay. Yeah, I have a love-hate relationship with LinkedIn, that's for sure.
I mean, it's when I mention chicken clucking, that's the chicken coop. It's amazing. It's full of BS. It's amazing. It's like a torrential output.
We have Richard. For sure. Richard is asking how much is the book, and I think it's kind of, you can pay whatever you want to pay, right, with LeanPub, but you have a recommended price.
There's a recommended price. If I remember correctly, now it's $34.97. There's a suggested price which is $49.97, but you can pay anything you want above $34.97.
Okay, cool.
And there are also discounts. So if you sign up on LeanPub's weekly or whatever weekly sales, it goes on discount quite often because it has done well, and so LeanPub promotes it. It gets discount, I think, up to 20% from the minimum price. So
awesome.
You can get it there.
Very cool. Well, it's called Northwind Elixir Traders. I highly recommend it. I have a copy. I'm a couple chapters in, but I'm excited to finish going through it because I love your approach is similar to mine. It's hands-on. You learn as you go, and I think that's the best way to do it.
Engineers. That's how we build a mental model of how everything works. I don't know about you, but if I don't understand something, it drives me crazy. Like I have this nagging feeling that I don't really understand it, and it pisses me off. Like, it makes me
I don't like having like a shallow. Yeah, I agree. I don't like the shallow knowledge. Yeah. All right.
It's what you don't know that kills you.
That's true. That is true. But all right, guys, thank you so much for joining us. I hope everyone has a good weekend, and I will see you guys next Friday. Testing.